everyone. Welcome back to Futurists, your one-stop shop for science, history, politics, and all things related to the world of tomorrow.
After immense success with SpaceX, Tesla, and other ventures, billionaire Elon Musk has recently embarked on a new mission, making human brains faster, smarter, and more effective. Through his company, Neuralink, Musk has been pushing the technology of BMI, or brain-machine interfaces, to its absolute limit. So in the future, will we all be telepathic cyborgs with brain implants? Or is Neuralink simply an unrealistic fantasy? We'll discuss this and more today.
Next, we have Sasan with some information about the history of BMIs.
Yeah, so brain-machine interfaces, also known as brain-computer interfaces, or BMIs and BCIs, they were first created in the 1970s in like a UCLA lab by a guy named Jacques Vidal. I'm pretty sure the National Science Foundation and DARPA, which is like the technology branch of the military, I think, funded that like research. Basically, they made like multi-array electrodes, and they recorded electrical activity and connected it with an external device. So BCIs or BMIs, they're used for like mapping the brain, augmenting brain's functions, and repairing cognitive, sensory, and motor functions. They can be pretty invasive as they are like multi-electrode arrays that are surgically implanted into your brain. However, like I think the first, continuing on the history of them, I think the first time the neuroprosthetic devices were used, which are like really related to the BMIs, that was in the 1990s, with neural stimulation being used to restore functional connectivity and to fix behavior disorders.
Alright, so I want to talk about like a few of the existing tools we have for BMIs. So one of the tools we have is called the fMRI. So this is a non-invasive recording tool that shows basically information about what's going on in the brain. It uses the same MRI technology that's used for many other parts of the body, such as like the chest. And it can usually be used to track changes in blood flow. And it's a fairly old technology, like it was invented in the 1970s. There's also the EEG, or electroencephalography, which is an array of electrodes that's non-invasively attached to the head surface, so it doesn't require any surgery or anything. And it records electrical activity in like different regions of the brain, and it obtains much more specific information than the fMRI, and can identify a range of neurological disorders, like for example epilepsy. So it's very helpful in that regard in medicine. And it's a very old technology, invented over a century ago by Hans Berger, like in the 1920s, I believe. But there's one main problem with it, which is that it can't differentiate between regions of the brain, or in other words, has no spatial resolution, which leads to like a decreased like accuracy and efficacy. There's also the ECOG, or electrocardiography, which is similar to the EEG, but it's a little more invasive, since it's under the skull and requires surgery, and it can track much more accurate information. And lastly, we have two tools called local field potentials and single unit recordings, which, unlike everything we've talked about so far, these are very invasive tools, and they're like basically needles that are stuck into the brain, but they can record very accurate, extremely accurate information and very specific information about the brain at a low scale.
Yeah, can you name the two invasive ones again? Local and
single unit recordings.
Yeah, so single unit recordings, I'm pretty sure they record one single neuron. I think the needles like goes below this the surface of a neuron, but multi-electrode arrays, they're basically just multiple arrays inserted into the brain. And most of these BMI and BCI technologies we're going to talk about use this type of technology. So continuing on the history, I forgot to mention that in 1999, Yang Dan from Berkeley, he decoded neuronal firings to reproduce images seen by cats, and the multi-electrode array was put in the thalamus, a region called the lateral geniculate nucleus, which integrates vision input and sends them to the occipital lobe in the brain to be processed. This was later also done with humans in Japan. So basically, neurons, obviously, they communicate with electric impulses, and the patterns of these impulses kind of can, when decoded, they can kind of tell you what activity the brain's doing. So what these scientists in different labs around the United States, in Berkeley, in Pittsburgh, in all those universities did is basically they decoded using algorithms what these signals meant. So now you could actually carry out the purpose of these signals, even with injuries like to the spine, to the brain, and some of them record signals from the brain, and some of them stimulate. So why the stimulation works is due to the neuroplasticity of the brain. So the brain, like when you're born, it's not like an object set in place. The synapses, the receptors, the neurotransmitters, all of them change as you gain experiences and learn new things. So this plasticity concept was used to develop these BMIs. And yeah, so adding a new natural sensor like cochlear implants and retinal implants that we're going to talk about later on. The concept of neuroplasticity can kind of help the brain adapt to these technologies and make BMIs very useful.
Yeah, so clearly, even our current BMIs are incredibly useful, but there's one main problem with our existing BMI tools, which I mentioned previously. It's that while some BMI tools can measure stuff at a large scale, like for example, the fMRI can generate images of the whole brain, and other BMIs can track very accurate, very specific, high resolution information at a scale of a single neuron, like the single unit recordings. There's no tool so far that's been developed which can combine both of these into a strong micro level brain imaging tool at a large scale. That's one of the problems which companies like Neuralink are working on, which we'll discuss later.
Yeah, so in order for that to happen, to have the same resolution but also have a larger scale, basically the electrodes have to be scaled. So right now they use 100, 200, 300, around those numbers of electrodes every single time a chip's inserted into the brain. However, for a whole brain accurate recording, you need 1,000,000 electrodes. So that's the challenge with this technology right now. So I kind of wanted to talk about the different places it's being used. So we know of their various uses. So some of their uses of these BMIs are in neuroprosthetics, with retinal implants, cochlear implants. We'll go more in detail with each one of those. Just an interesting fact that I had is that 220,000 people worldwide today use cochlear implants to regain some hearing. Pacemakers were one of the first BMIs used. There's been experiments with prosthetics and artificial limbs where monkeys and humans, they've been able to navigate computer cursors by just thinking about it, or move prosthetic arms by just thinking about it. In Neuralink, they use pigs, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure they had a monkey playing video games. They have pigs motion decoded. So that's the type of technology that's being used right now. So yeah, these BMIs definitely have a lot of potential that we'll go more into later on.
Yeah, we often have an idea that cyborgs or part human, part machine combinations are just a thing in science fiction or television. But as your statistics shows, they're honestly still a thing today and have been a thing for a while, with old technology like pacemakers. But moving on from that, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I would even argue that just having a smartphone kind of could qualify us as cyborgs because it's like a third input of like information. Like sometimes we like we basically like store memories in our brain, right? But we could also store memories in, like our notes app on our phone. So even though it's not technically like a cyborg like definition wise, it just shows that like we've been attached more and more to technology, and as these technologies develop, they could even end up in our own bodies and help us more that way.
Yeah, that's true. In the developed world today, like modern life is almost like indistinguishable from technology. Like it's such a like ubiquitous part of modern life. And I also want to touch on like one type of BMI which is interesting is motor cortex BMIs. So these BMIs interpret the motor cortex's neurons, which normally control movement, and they use them for a different purpose. So for example, we have the motor cortex BMIs, which can interpret a human's thoughts that about moving a cursor into actual cursor movement on a computer. So basically, it's a sort of mind reading to control like movement functions. And like as Hassan mentioned, this is already prevalent in prosthetics, and we're going to see like in the future a lot of brain-to-brain communication as well through motor cortex BMIs. And one experiment I found interesting was that two people in separate buildings, they got them to work together and play a full-fledged video game like simply through their thoughts. It's kind of insane.
Yeah. So talking more about that like motor cortex like BMIs. A guy like I'm pretty sure in like one of the recent World Cups, the starting touch was made by a guy who's paralyzed, but through an exoskeleton controlled by a BMI, he was able to take the first touch of the game. That opened one of the World Cups. Pretty sure it was in Brazil because 2014 because the doctor is Brazilian and he's pretty famous in this field. So yeah, in motor cortex like BMIs, it's true that they record like neuronal firings from like the motor cortex and wirelessly send it to like a prosthetic or a computer device, and like they already developed algorithms that decode these signals to like, for example, if you usually like move your hand to the right and there's a specific signal for like the velocity of your hand, for the force that you apply, for all of that, they've been able to decode all of that and send the exact like command to the computer or prosthetic to control it. But one important aspect of this technology is that it also needs feedback. So it needs to be like in a closed loop. So that way, like it can correct itself. In an open loop where like you cannot see what's happening, these technologies efficacy and like working kind of declines. So they need to like find a way to fix it as well.
Wait, can you like explain what you mean by like closed loop?
Yeah. So let's say we're controlling a prosthetic, right? And we see the prosthetic. So by just seeing it, we can kind of see if our commands are working or not. The same thing goes like these prosthetics could have like sensors on them that kind of like tells them where they are in space. That way they can like be better handled. Like these sensory input is like wirelessly sent back to the electrode arrays in the brain. So this way the function would improve. If it did not have this function, like it would not be able to add to like micro control different things and would not work as well. So that's what I mean.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, motor cortex neurons are definitely like one of the areas in BMI research which we should definitely keep an eye out on. Yeah, they can have massive impacts on our lives.
They're pretty useful too. Like for example, let's say someone has a spinal injury, so they cannot control their hands or legs anymore because the spine that like connects the brain to these nerves is broken. So basically, what could be done is like just inserting a BMI into the brain and having some like wireless receptors in the like limbs. You could directly transfer the signals from the brain to the nerve endings that without going through the spine which is injured. So that way you could restore like motor function. Or
BMIs.
Yeah,
BMIs can definitely make like medical miracles like that happen, which is incredible. And on that note, we can now talk about like the cochlear implants which
Yeah.
can do a similar function but for hearing. And so basically, to put it in a nutshell, the cochlea is the primary part of the ear that converts airwaves that are coming from like the outside into electrical impulses in the brain that are interpreted as sounds. And so most people who are deaf or who have hearing problems, they actually have issues with their cochleas rather than like their outer ears. And so what cochlear implants are devices placed into the ear with a microphone on one end and an array of electrodes on the other. And this allows people to obtain some hearing again, people who are deaf. However, cochlear implants are still in very early stages, and they still have nothing close to real hearing. And retinal implants are something very similar, but for eyes, like helping to reconnect like the brain and eye, and help blind people to have some semblance of vision again. You have anything to say on either of those?
Yeah. So I'm gonna like kind of touch on this as well. So the cochlear implants, yeah, they kind of basically just try to replace your ear's function. They like take voice input, like audio input. They store different frequencies and they stimulate your auditory nerve. So right now the amount of electrodes used is not enough to like gain the same hearing level as you would with your normal ear, but with like about 35 electrodes, you would pretty much have the same kind of function as a normal ear would have. And right now, I think there are most like 16 electrodes is what's being used. So for retinal implants, you kind of have the same thing. So right now, we have like about 60 electrodes used. So when they're inserted, the person can regain some visual function, such as seeing edges, seeing light and dark spots. But with about 600 to 1,000 electrodes, you could see and recognize faces, which is that would, if that technology can be implemented in a widespread scale, that basically just eliminates birth, deafness, and blindness, which is a pretty big medical miracle. I also want to talk about like speech synthesizers. So as you know, like some people are not able to produce speech, or so they have aphasia, or they might not be able to like decode speech, like understand what somebody else is saying. I think that's called Wernicke's aphasia. With these BMIs, you could basically restore those functions if you can decode what the speech signals are. You can try to stimulate the neurons, and same thing for understanding speech. So basically, all functions of the brain, when they go wrong, and like you have algorithms that decoded these neuronal signals, you can pretty much restore the normal function of the human brain, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it's true that like while in current stages of development, like cochlear implants, retinal implants, and speech synthesizers, they still can't really get to the level of the human body. Like there's being rapid progress made in all of these, and within like the next like few decades, they likely can and might even surpass like the abilities of the human body, which would be incredible to see. And also one more like item of BMI use that I'd like to touch on is called deep brain simulation. And so this is when one or two electrode wires with multiple electrode sites are inserted into the brain and connected to a pacemaker, which is inserted into the body, usually around the upper chest area. And together, these devices can serve several medical functions relating to the body, or especially the chest, such as reducing like the tremors related to Parkinson's disease. Now we can like transition into like the future of BMIs. It's Neuralink.
Yeah, before we do that, I kind of want to talk about something else right before. So
All right.
as you just said, deep brain stimulation can reduce Parkinson's, tremors, seizures, like reduce OCD symptoms, PTSD, all of that. But another interesting aspect that we kind of touched on, but we didn't go like into the specifics of, is like telepathy. So even though it's kind of like a sci-fi concept right now, it's kind of been experimentally proven to kind of like be able to work in the future. So this scientist, the Brazilian scientist we talked about before in the World Cup thing, the same guy, his name is I think Nicolis or something like that. He had different rats in like rats in the United States and rats in Brazil. So what happened was, in the experiment, there were two transparent boxes, in Brazil, one had like food, a reward, and the other did not. So the rat had to press a button that corresponded with the box that had the food in Brazil. In the United States, the rat could not see the boxes. The boxes were not transparent. So you would just expect a 50% chance of the rat getting the right box to get the reward. But since these rats were telepathically connected through the internet, the neuronal decoding and recording on the rats in Brazil caused the rats in USA to have a 64% success rate. So their success rate increased pretty significantly. And this is just an early stage of this technology. As you said, this also been worked on people with person in one room having the controller and the person in another room seeing the screen and them playing a video game. So that's another interesting function. And the last interesting function that I just heard about is fixing disorders of consciousness, such as when you're in coma. So when you're in coma, there's a lot of medical questions that need to be resolved, and since you're unconscious, they kind of just make it for you, or ask your loved ones to make it for you. But in some stages of coma, you're actually able to make those decisions. You just cannot communicate them. So what they can do is they can decode signals from the human brain without you even communicating what you want, just speaking it, because you're in a coma state. If you're in in a early stage of coma, they can kind of decode what you want and get an answer from you without you even saying anything, which is pretty interesting. It kind of looks like a miracle.
Yeah, that kind of solves one of the ethical dilemmas related with comas. And it's also pretty incredible. Yeah, go on.
No, I was just gonna say now we can transition into the topic you want.
Oh yeah. I also wanted to say that's incredible that you were able to get a mouse in Brazil in the USA to connect, telepathically.
Through the internet too.
Yeah, it's they're on the level of humans essentially. And so Neuralink is a company which is in the news recently for BMI. And so what Neuralink is a company started by Elon Musk and 7 other co-founders, mostly researchers in the fields of neuroscience and BMI technology, including many professors from famous universities like Berkeley and UCSD. And so Elon and these other co-founders, their goal is in the short term to treat brain diseases, but in the long term, their goal is to eventually enhance the human mind, making it faster, smarter, etc. And it's a lot. Elon Musk has said it's largely been based on science fiction. Well, it could turn to reality.
Yeah.
And
Neuralink is pretty interesting. They have one robot surgeon that they made themselves. It can surgically implant a multi-array electrode with 100 electrodes into your brain without you even bleeding. It kind of just finds where the arteries and the veins are and avoids them. So that was pretty interesting to me. That they kind of eliminated one of the problems people would have with this new technology, which is invasiveness. Another problem kind of has is bandwidths. I know that Neuralink is trying to solve this with making smaller electrodes and implanting them into the brain. So right now, the maximum number of neurons that can be recorded at the time is 500. However, the Stephenson's law for these electrodes states that every 7.4 years, the number of neurons that can be decoded is doubled. This is kind of an analogy to the Moore's law for computers that stated that every 2 years, you had double the number of transistors. So unless there needs to be a revolutionary technology that increases the pace if we want to implement this technology faster at a larger scale, like how we printed transistors into computer chips. There needs to be a revolutionary technology that still has not arrived to take this tech to the next level.
Yeah. Elon Musk has also done several demonstrations so far with Neuralink, including one demonstration where he implanted like some like chips into a pig, like making Neuralink technology work with that. And he's also made interestingly a few monkeys play video games. And at one live demonstration, Musk described the device as like a Fitbit in the skull, which is kind of cool. But it's also important to note that many researchers have heavily criticized Neuralink and for example, the MIT Technology Review, which is one of the most prestigious newspapers in the science world, has said that like Neuralink's demonstrations are stir excitement, and they've said that Neuralink has no evidence that they can treat like any of the diseases that Elon Musk has like claimed they could treat. And yeah, and also like at least 23 monkeys recently were found to have died in Neuralink experimentation. It's like 21% of their entire monkey count, which raises some like animal ethics issues and also some safety issues regarding it. And Elon Musk has even said that like Neuralink should be ready by 2022. But he did say this like a bit earlier, so it's unsure if like he's still on this timeline. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's still like a questionable field. Like
Yeah, there's definitely some ethics concerns there, and Neuralink is actually not like the most innovative brain chip company right now. It's kind of like more famous just because Elon Musk is the founder. It's like the new ideas are there, like using wireless BMIs and the robot I just talked about. However, the like actual BMI itself, the number of electrodes they have, it's not like the top BMI company that's available. But since other companies like Tesla and SpaceX have improved a lot and innovated, it'll be interesting to see if we can also do this with this company. Yeah. So I also wanted to talk about like some relevant technologies to this field. So DARPA, they have a brain project. It's just called a brain project. They aim to have 1 million electrodes stored in like the place of like 2 nickels, like in that small of a space. I thought that was kind of relevant. There's also some new technologies with like silk interfaces that are printed on your body like a tattoo. They can kind of receive some sensory input and send it to their brain. They're basically like electrodes, but printed, like kind of tattooed on your body. Then we have the transmagnetic stimulation, which basically we have a magnetic coil around the brain. It induces an electric field in the brain to stimulate like a specific function. It's kind of used to alleviate some problems such as like Parkinson's, tremors, and like OCD, PTSD. It's in the early stage right now, but it's pretty like promising. And the last two are neuronal dust, which are like tiny sensors that communicate with ultrasound, and also optogenetic stimulation, which kind of use photons to like activate and deactivate certain genes in your body to stimulate a certain nerve. So I thought those were pretty interesting technologies that were relevant to BMIs, and could also lead to like BMIs also being improved.
yeah, those technologies are definitely gonna like revolutionize the field since they're so much like stronger and more effective than the ones we covered at the beginning of the video, like EEGs and like fMRIs. And like combined with like the increased funding with Neuralink, which like as you said is not even the only like major company working in BMIs right now, this could like cause a extreme progress or like rapid progress in BMIs in the next few decades. And I've even read one article which said that even by 2030 we might even use like BMIs instead of iPhones. I don't know if that's like a realistic timescale, but it's still like interesting.
I personally think maybe like 2050, 2060 times, like the first time they actually will be implemented in a way to augment like human beings, not just to like correct our like disorders. Like by augment, I mean like there's like a bunch of functions that they talk about right now. For example, storing memories, like for people with Alzheimer's and stuff, that could be helpful to like. So memories are basically just like neuronal like firings stored in your brain. So like re-stimulating those neurons can kind of like revive the memory. So they're talking about doing that. They're talking about like increased learning and like uploading like language learning and stuff into your brain, like those kind of functions that augment human beings, I don't think they're gonna come around that quickly. I also read a book named Live Wired by a guy named David Eagleman. He has like a biotech company too. So that guy, he talks about like adding sensory input into the brain. For example, having ultraviolet or infrared sensors, and like training the brain using the neuroplasticity concept to understand those signals. So like people are looking into the animal world to see what kind of like sensory input they have that humans do not, and trying to like just add that experience to human beings as well. If that happens, I think we can kind of call ourselves cyborgs, but I do not think that's going to happen anytime fast. So
Yeah,
that's my personal take on that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that like medical uses of BMIs are definitely like far more like near into the future than like true like human augmentation uses of BMIs.
Or happening
Uh,
right now, like with cochlear implants and stuff. Although they're not great, but like they've started to be implemented.
Yeah, I've heard Elon Musk. I've heard him say that like neurological disease might be entirely a thing of the past if we can get these BMIs as advanced enough. And yeah, but like even though they aren't in that high stages yet, augmentation BMIs like create many ethical issues, which we can discuss now. Like for
Yeah.
example, one
You can
ethical issue I found, yeah, like one ethical issue I found interesting we can talk about is like how can we ensure that users they don't become the victims of like technological indentured servitude, or you have to like keep paying for like security updates or like continuing technology, or else like actually suffer. Like right now, like we can like either choose to update our phones, like not update our phones, right? Like if our entire brains are essentially like at large smartphones, like what happens if we don't pay for like an update?
Yeah. Also, like problems with like hacking, just like being taken control of by another being, or just problems with like invasiveness causing problems later on, or problems with just like the experiments, as you mentioned, with like the monkeys dying. So yeah, but like the ethical issue you brought up, I think it's pretty interesting too. Like, what if like a company takes a monopoly over these BMIs, and since everybody has it, you're kind of like forced to accept what they say, and they'll become like the most powerful entity that there is. So yeah, there are definitely some ethical issues, but like just the general, like I still think BMIs are positive. I think these like issues can be prevented. I think like the logic behind them is that like the nervous system is a circuit. Like right now, if like you have an electrical circuit and something breaks, you alter it, you add something new to it, or you add like a new wire, maybe a new branch or something. So the brain is kind of like that, but since it's biological, we've not been able to add a new like communication way. But with these like BMIs, I think we've been finally able to like think about it and kind of solve that. And also like the brain is like a live organ. It changes with experiences, with memory. Like when you learn violin or piano or something, your receptors, your synapses change. So that way you can learn the specific skill you're trying to do. So the flexibility of the brain allows you to like train it new things. Like like if a new sense is added, or like even right now with like cochlear implants and stuff, they train the people who have those implants to like learn to decode those signals. So I think those two concepts are the logic behind these BMIs, and I see them as a general positive that could eliminate like neurological problems and even augment human beings, increase our communication speed. Like when we try to communicate with words, we cannot completely describe what we're thinking. Like let's say I had a dream last night that I'm trying to describe to you. I cannot completely describe it with words. Or if I'm sensing something or having an emotion, words cannot completely describe how I'm feeling. They're kind of like a communication barrier. And we've been using language since like forever, since like the first time human beings have been around, like 50, 60,000 years ago, maybe more, like Homo sapiens, or like 100,000 years ago, whatever. So I think it's finally time to add a layer to that, and I think BMIs could help. But I see the ethical concerns there too.
Yeah, That's an interesting point you said earlier about monopolies, though, because like essentially like Neuralink, even if it's not the most innovative, they are like heavily funded, much more than any other company. And they have support from the world's richest man. Like they could very reasonably become a monopoly. But at the same time, your pros about BMIs make a lot of sense too. One thing that I would add is like there's a lot of like social issues regarding BMIs. For example, like income inequality. Like the effects of debt are already quite great. But imagine if like the rich could pay for like brain implantations to like make themselves smarter or like make their brains run faster. Like this could fuel like pretty immense class divides and like could fuel a lot of like social problems.
Yeah, I
And like
kind of saw a poll recently that talked about like BMIs and their popularity. They were even less popular than like genetic engineering. So people definitely see those concerns and are kind of like scared of the new technology coming up. So I think scientists
Yeah.
need to address this issue and like try to prevent these things from happening and reassuring the people so they can have increased trust in technologies that could actually help them.
yeah, that's definitely true. And one final thing we can touch on before we end this episode is mind uploading. So this is basically like the pinnacle of like BMIs, like very long term, like far into the future thing. But this is the idea that the entire brain, like all of the electrical signals, can be like put into a computer and replicated, essentially like giving a person like an afterlife in a digital realm, which is like very interesting stuff. It would require a incredible amount of like computer power, would probably require quantum computing. In the future, it's very possible, like probably like many decades down the line, maybe like 2100 at the earliest. But this also
Yeah.
poses a lot of like unique ethical concerns.
I
And
think
yeah,
connectomes, which are like full brain models that are being developed right now with like all the synapses and all the receptors and everything being mapped, these can kind of pave the way to the future like mind uploading thing. But yeah, I do not see it happening very soon. I maybe even think 2100 is even like maybe too early of a prediction as well. Like I see it happening a couple centuries from now. It's like really tough. We do not even know like the scale of consciousness or just like where it originates from, and mind is like really dependent on consciousness. So until we figure out what consciousness is and what part of our body it originates from, I think we cannot really figure out mind uploading until that time.
that's a good point. And like even our cochlear implants right now, they can give us like very minimal hearing. So it's definitely like too early to like worry about things like mind
this
uploading.
far in the future. Yeah, like it
Yeah, it
kind
could be,
of
like-
goes into a realm of sci-fi.
Yeah, we also don't know like how much technological progress is going to expand into the future. But yeah, it's still
Yeah.
interesting to conceptualize. Do you have any like ending takes on Neuralink BMI and like just,
think
like
the
cyborgs
idea-
in general?
Yeah, I think the idea behind them is really good. I'm really interested to see what's going to happen in the future. I think they have a lot of promise, and I think their ethical concerns can be eliminated. I think all new technology has ethical concerns. Even like smartphones, they had ethical concerns. Television, radio, everything that's been new, people were first scared of it until we figure out ways to like solve the ethical concerns. Some of the problems haven't been solved, but like we've learned to adapt. We're an adaptive species. I think we can do it, and yeah, I think the benefits are really interesting. Like just being able to learn more, have memory, just like communicate mind to mind without like direct communication. These things seem really interesting to me, and I hope we can actually implement them while minimizing the risks, as you mentioned.
Yeah, that's very true. Like even when cars were invented, like there was widespread backlash to them for like posing a massive danger to humans. And like, well, I think I would still be a bit more pessimistic, or like I may be a bit more skeptical than you on BMIs, because I think that like the progress that's been made is like not as much as like people like Elon Musk are saying. I feel like a lot of the like more like out of the norm things like augmenting like brain function, I think that's still like into the future. And I also feel like a lot of ethical concerns need to be addressed and before like they can really be like made into a part of human life. But regardless, like obviously BMIs are incredible technology which have the potential to destroy like neurodegenerative diseases as we know it. And so we should definitely like keep an eye out in the future as to what happens to BMIs and Neuralink, and many other technologies too. Like this century for humans is going to be like revolutionary with like rapid technological growth around the world. So you have to keep an eye out for what the future will hold. It's a good reason to like,
Yeah, right before you can go on, and then I'm gonna say like one last thing.
yeah, so that's a good reason to like subscribe to the Futurists. We'll like continue discussing in future episodes like technologies, political concepts, economic concepts which are going to change the world in the coming century. Yeah, sports too.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say is that like this episode, at least for me, it was kind of inspired by a Tim Urban article on Neuralink on like Way by Why. I think that was pretty interesting, and also a book named Live Wires by David Eagleman. I hope we can have like people like that feature on our next episodes. We'll keep you updated if we're able to do this later on.
Yeah.
But
also link both of those
to our channels for these updates.
Yeah, we'll link both of those in the description below.
Yeah.
But yeah, stay tuned for our next episode coming soon, and we'll see you later on the Futurists.
The brain rocks.